So again, my name is Joy, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Healing Justice Campaigner with Restore Oakland. And I organize alongside the Care First Community Coalition. We are a coalition of now 16 organizations fighting for Care First in the county. And we have been organizing for the last 2 years for Care First Jails Last, which is a policy that really fights to decarcerate Santa Rita Jail of folks with behavioral health needs, but also to improve our behavioral health resources throughout the county, because those two things are intertwined. To my left is a panel of folks who have been advocating alongside us and have been working really on the task force in county processes. And we're going to get a chance to hear from them about what it was like to put this together and tell you about the recommendations. But I also want to just give you some context and ground you in the moment that we're in. So on May 24th, last Thursday, the Care First Jails Last Task Force adopted 58 recommendations, down from, 190 wow. recommendations. And these were recommendations that really are meant to, they were put together at the request of the Board of Supervisors for how to actually make this happen. How do we decarcerate the jail and improve behavioral health outcomes? But also, we wanted to make sure that this was an opportunity to really transform the entire system from the bottom to the top, because we realized that when we're talking about increasing behavioral health outcomes, we're also talking about coordinating agency communications. We're also talking about budget transparency. We're also talking about housing. All of these things go together in tandem, and so this is an opportunity really to provide a vision for the county for all of it at once. Because we know that without this vision, we're going to see more of the same. And over the past 2 years, without the Care First Jails Last policy, we saw many preventable deaths in the jail. We saw many folks that were better served in the community, could not get access to diversion, languishing in the jail. We also saw opportunities for people to get housing that weren't able to, family members who were trying to access the county services that didn't know how to. And these were the things that were really pushing our advocacy forward and grounding this work. And every time we learned more, we brought it back to the task force. And so this is kind of the reason why we've been doing this work. And Care First, the Care First Community Coalition comes out of the work of Decarcerate Alameda County. Before that, it was the Justice Involved Mental Health Task Force. And before that, it was really like confirmed community members, confirmed family members who were really just wanting to get the care that their family members deserved. And so now, with 58 recommendations, what is the opportunity before us to transform behavioral health care in the county, to make sure that people are getting the care that they need, but also to take care of the racial justice, the racial equity crisis that we have on our hands, to take care of the housing crisis that we have on our hands, and also to make sure, and also to make sure that we're holding our Board of Supervisors accountable, because ultimately they are the ones who have the power to make these recommendations policy. They are the ones who have the power to allocate budget to make sure that these things get funded. You can't make a recommendation for staff without money to pay that staff, right? You cannot make a recommendation for diversion without money to make sure that that diversion happens, and without making sure that the agencies are coordinated with each other. So that's really what we're trying to do today. I'll stop talking. And really the folks that have the bulk of the wisdom here to listen to tonight are the people to my left. And I graciously thank you for joining us. The first person who I'm going to introduce tonight is Christina Bedrosian, who was the chair of the Care First Jails Last Recommendations Committee. Christina is a multidisciplinary innovator and strategist, currently working as an independent consultant, supporting social justice initiatives with strategic planning, storytelling, and impact measurement. She was the executive director of Community Works West, the San Francisco Bay Area's leading restorative justice organization serving people who are incarcerated or at risk of incarceration, their families and survivors. And prior to joining Community Works, she was the managing director at the Bright Research Group for 8 years. While there, Christina offers strategic direction and technical assistance to the city and county agencies, nonprofits, and foundations on key initiatives in the areas of community violence, homelessness, behavioral health, and trauma. Christina, welcome.
Thanks, Joy. Hi, everyone.
So Christina, I just wanted to get a sense of how are you entering into this conversation tonight? What was your role, and how were you an advocate for Clear Coast Jail Fast?
Thanks, Joy, and thanks for having me. I think bio gave the whole professional background, but I think it's important for me always in spaces like this to talk a little bit about the personal. And for me, I'm Middle Eastern, I'm Armenian. I grew up in a community and in a family with plenty of untreated and often undiagnosed mental illness and substance use, and saw and continue to see multiple members of my family and friends end up in jails and prisons and homeless and just otherwise causing harm to themselves and to the rest of us who are trying to take care of them. And I name that just because it's a personal issue for me, and I know it is for so many of the other people who are in this room and who are on this task force. And there's this kind of moment of transformation that I think folks go through when you have a personal experience like this, where you go from just trying to connect your family member, your loved one, or yourself, if it's you, to services, to then realizing those services just aren't enough. And there's a whole scale change that has to happen for the systems to invest in people's wellness as much as they invest in jails and prisons and incarceration and all of the Band-Aid services that we put on the gaping wound that is that we see in our communities. So I think all the work that I've done in professionally supporting different social impact initiatives, working inside of jails and prisons, working with Community Works on restorative justice initiatives, etc., has all been about trying to move forward an agenda where I'm able to both kind of code switch between the personal experience that I have and the professional kind of experience and educational privilege that I have to push people forward. Because I think through this effort in the task force and through work that I've done otherwise, I'm an idealist, but still a pragmatist in some ways around realizing that systems are made up of policies, money, and people, and you have to change all of those things to have something move forward. And with the task force, I think we've done an incredible job of being able to think about new policies, new recommendations, to start to continue to move the work of changing the people, all the individuals inside of those systems who we need to be bought into this change in order for it to happen, and hopefully the money. I think we'll be spending time after this to start to talk about additional advocacy with the Board of Soups, and like you brought up, until there's money put to this, and effort put to this, there's not going to be the whole scale change that we actually need, So I think that's just some of my background and what I'm kind of bringing to this effort. The way I showed up in this space, I was appointed by Supervisor Miley as a representative of District 4. I've lived in Oakland and Berkeley for the last 20 plus years, my whole adult life pretty much, and was very excited about being able to serve my community in this way, and didn't really know, I was pregnant and then had a baby and wasn't really expecting to step into all the roles I ended up stepping into in the last 2.5 years, but I was so excited to do it because there were so many of the incredible people on the stage with me and in the audience who were just so activated and were all spending their personal time to organize and to push and to dream big and to be idealists and let ourselves live in that space but also think about the practicality that needs to move forward. So I helped shepherd at the recommendations ad hoc committee, which was a subcommittee of the task force, mostly of the community members who were appointed, as well as other community members who are not appointed but are just spending their time and their intellect to push that work forward, to develop those 198 recommendations and then collapse them down to the 50, whatever it is that we have, and try to make sense of them and create a process that, I think without process, the urgency, there's so much urgency in this work, and I'm a process person and decided to try to use that to like create some organization that I think helped us move the ball forward, and come up with where we are today. So, yeah, I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
So something that really struck me in your answer was that you are personally involved, right? That there are people in your family who have mental health issues, but also that with a restorative justice background, you very well know that when you're able to meet people with care, they will, on the other side, hopefully like be better than when they went in. And that kind of brings me to this thing that we say often, and that you cannot get well in a cell. Incarceration is not going to be the answer to problems that shouldn't have been criminalized in the first place. And when we talk about trying to decarcerate the jail, that's a big ask to make for system actors.
Yes.
And so I wonder what lessons or takeaways you have for trying to instigate change of this matter through a county body like the task force.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We were chatting about this a little bit yesterday, and I was like furiously writing my notes and trying to limit what to say. So I think there are a lot of lessons learned. I think the first piece is like actually educating folks about what you said, is that the jail is not a place where people get well. I think for those who don't have personal experience with it, and even for some of us who do, you know, I mean, I've had times where I'm like, I'm at my wit's end with my sister. Like, I cannot. I need someone else to take care of it, you know, and it's not jail, but it's like, I want someone else to do this. Like, I'm tired. And trying to create an understanding of like the amount of effort that falls on families, especially women in families, to take care of their loved ones, whether they're in jail or they're in a mental health hospital or whatever, in a bed, to navigate, and that tax on folks. So I think there's just a lack of understanding around that, and it's kind of necessary to start there. Because I think we were talking yesterday, and it's like the next lesson learned I want to talk about is how do we get the folks in the DA's office and the sheriff's office to actually have skin in the game and push this work forward, because there is a feeling that they're elected officials and they want to respond to the noisiest voices that usually are people who don't have access to this personal experience and who just want to not see people who are not well and put them away wherever that is. And unfortunately in this process, the DA's office didn't show up a lot. They didn't provide a plan that was helpful. The sheriff's office showed up, but didn't give us the data that we needed. The DA didn't give us the data that we needed. It was kind of like pulling teeth the whole time, which is no surprise for any of us who have been in this work. It's no surprise that law enforcement doesn't have buy-in into this, but this is a place where the Board of Supervisors actually said, we have buy-in, and we want all of you to have buy-in, agency heads who are sitting at the table next to us as community members. And we need the DA, who has discretion, prosecutorial discretion. They get to decide how cases are charged or diverted, to make a bigger decision when it comes to how this is going to change. We need the Board of Supervisors to say, yeah, those almost $30 million is going to move into these different systems. And I think The irony of this is we ended up with a lot of recommendations that ended up going to the behavioral health department and very few that ended up going to the sheriff's office and the DA's office. And there's good reason for that, but also like it's kind of like the negative attention ended up on the agency that we know has the better potential solutions and current solutions. So I think there's something there. There's just a tension there. There's a tension there. And I think the last thing I'll say, because I know I'm running out of time, is just I do question whether this needed to be an ongoing oversight body as opposed to a time-bound task force, because of that. Because there's a accountability part to this that now we are fighting and struggling a bit to craft. And it's going to require a lot of intentional work in community together to continue to get that moving forward. Because there isn't an official oversight board over the DA's office. You know, like it's the election, but who votes?
I mean, you make a good point about accountability because, right, these are elected officials. And as much as ACBH is appointed, it's we the people that put folks in office.
Yes.
And so we also have a role to hold folks accountable to making these a reality.
That's right.
And so the buy-in really, our voices are necessary to make that buy-in happen as well.
That's right.
I just want to ask with the few minutes left that we have with you, Christina, how would you want folks to understand the Care First Jail's last recommendations, and which would you say are the most critical?
Yeah. Well, I think John did a great job pulling the executive summary of the recs, so I would really encourage everyone to read those and distribute them to your communities. I think, you know, I was maximizing diversion opportunities is crucial. I just mentioned we need the DA, and I'm not talking about this administration specifically, any administration. No one before this has done it well enough, and in the future we're going to need to hold all of them accountable. But just being willing to divert cases to behavioral health court, collaborative courts, other services, not just so that folks can then stand trial, but so that they actually can access supportive recovery and housing and other supports that'll keep them out. I just think that's essential and something I'm going to continue to fight for. And I've seen where diversion works. I was a part of and got to witness restorative justice diversion with young folks with all kinds of cases, and it really is effective. And those diversion opportunities change people's lives. They change the family members' lives. They change communities' lives. We need to make sure that that happens. I also we all talk about housing, but I think that the types of housing, you know, there was this aha moment a lot of us had at some point around the difference between beds and housing, and we need all of them. And when you're talking about people with mental illness and substance use and co-occurring disorders, there's kind of a spectrum from a crisis bed all the way to permanent supportive housing, board and cares, and other housing for folks who will never be able to live independently, and like accepting that as a truth and having different tiers of housing that are available to them. And there were so many recommendations that we came up with. And honestly, I feel a lot of hope in our leadership in the housing departments right now, and their genuine, kind of like plans to say like we are going to do this. We know what we need to do, but we need the land and the money, you know. And I think we wrote many recommendations that really spoke to that. Whether it was land trusts or, you know, increasing subsidies for board and care so that it was a more sustainable long-term solution for folks who can't live independently, etc. I think those are essential. And the last one I'll lift up as well is just pay equity for behavioral health providers. I think, you know, when I was executive director at Community Works, we had a few positions on my staff who were behavioral health clinicians, because as, you know, over time, unfortunately, the number of people who are going into jails and prisons, we've seen an uptick. You know, the people I've worked with in jails and prisons and like increasingly are mentally ill, are addicted to drugs, and need a different type of support than just folks who were, you know, for lack of a better word, just poor and didn't have other options. And so we started hiring counselors, and the budget that we could get was often on par with the budget that most nonprofit folks make, which is between $50,000 and $80,000 on average, which is despicable, and it's just not enough money for anyone who does this work. But in particular, when you're talking about trying to hire folks from the community who can do behavioral health work, it's just not competitive. It's not a competitive enough salary. Folks are, they have to feed their own folks too. They have to feed their own families, and they will have start their own practices or go work for the county, or maybe even go work for the jail because they'll make $200,000 there. And like counties and systems keep poaching the best folks away and then refuse to pay CBOs for the actual money to do the work.
Thank you, Christina. I really just want to hype on something that you just said, in that our best people keep getting poached.
Oh yeah.
To do work that otherwise, right, if they really want to care for the community, they really want to help folks in their community, we should be paying them.
Yes.
We should be making the community's business.
Yes.
And that's super important, because care is on a spectrum from creating a continuum of care where people are getting housing and also services, but also care is paying people a living wage.
Yes. And more.
And more. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
Next is Katie Nixon. Thank you. Katie is a member of the Care First Community Coalition as well as the task force, and she reclaimed her freedom through the Delancey Street Foundation in 2014 and reconnected with the Young Women's Freedom Center, where young women are transformed into leaders. This is where Katie got her start in the nonprofit sector as a volunteer. While experiencing homelessness herself in 2017, Katie was offered a peer counselor position with Hospitality House, and then she began focusing on policy and organizing in 2019 through a Ronald Elder Freeman Policy Fellowship with Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. Katie also organizes alongside the Women's Policy Institute, as well as All of Us for None. Welcome to the stage, Katie.
Thank you. I was hoping you was gonna shorten that thing.
Well, your accolades are long, my friend. So Katie, first question saying to you, how are you arriving into the conversation around Care First, Jails Last? What was your role, and what's your perspective on why this is important at this moment?
Thank you. That is a fantastic question. But first, I really do want to just give it up for the Restore Oakland staff, Joy and Corey and Kat, because these folks really came into the Care First, Jill's Last community and really kind of held it down and held us together in a real way, making sure we were on top of things, helping with rallies and just whatever support we needed. And then there was a slew of other community members that wasn't on the task force. And definitely John is a star, okay? I don't know what we would have did without John in the background, as a dedicated community member, really helping us flesh some of this stuff out. When you get to some of the legalese and maybe kind of diving into the documents and stuff, it really can take a long time. Then you're fighting on the government website that never works as well as a Lyft website does. And so John was really there to answer questions and just help us again make things succinct. And so I really do appreciate John and the Restore Oakland staff and the team for really just supporting the community portion, because the community part, it was only 5 people from the community. The other 50,000 people were government agencies. And I do feel like some of those people, it's your day job to be sitting and reading through this stuff. That's not what I'm getting paid to do it. So, I think John and the Restore group really kind of came through with helping with that stuff. And so for me, I come to the task force as a community member. When it was brought to my attention, I was taught how to get involved. And so I was just kind of well, you should get involved since you know how, and not always have to be paid and stuff. And so I wanted to get involved to support the community in whatever way I can. I will say for me, it was a rough 2 years, 2.5. I really don't know how long it was, because I do have a full-time job that I was trying to like do a good job at. At the time when it started, I was still kind of new in the field, and so yeah, I did kind of have like some space to prove and some ground to make up and things like that. And so my full-time job definitely, obviously, was a priority. I'm young, black, and poor. I do still consider myself poor. I do make a good salary and have a few dollars, but you know, by any means, though, I'm not well off or well supported or anything like that. And so my job obviously had to come first for me. And yeah, you know, that's really what brought me to this. I'm formally incarcerated. My entire family is formally incarcerated. So all of both of my parents and all 5 of my siblings, we've all served some time in someone's penal institution somewhere. And so that really kind of drives me want to be in these spaces and do the work. And to also be learning and supporting mental health issues. You know, I think mental health issues come in all shapes and sizes. Some of us have small ones, you know, that we really don't know that that's what it is. Some folks running around embarrassed about whatever little condition you got. And so I wanted to be involved for those reasons as well. And was that it?
Yes, it was. You know, as a formerly incarcerated person, your voice was so important on the task force to really get a sense of like, what do folks actually need? How would this impact people directly? And so I wonder, from your perspective, what's been missing in the conversation around Care First, and what's been missing around the conversation around public safety, and what recommendations would really impact currently incarcerated folks and formerly incarcerated folks?
I do think having formerly incarcerated people at the different tables and the conversations is important, because a lot of times, you know, like the system and the policies and the ideologies have really been designed by folks in academia, and we love these professors and scholars. We love the academia folks. I'm serious, we do. But sometimes though, well, a lot of the times, that stuff is not, it be looking and sounding good on the paper, but that is not how it shows up in real life. And so when somebody has been there in the jails or been through their mental health issues and is now stable and able to participate, I think it is important to help walk through a great idea to really show how this shows up in real life. For example, now this little example is going to be off topic, but when we was designing the safe parking spaces for the homeless people, because I'm formerly homeless, it was a great idea, you know, the safe parking spaces, to be able to pull your vehicles in and have a night and stuff like that. It sounded real good until you got to the part where my car needed to be registered and had to match my name, and that screened out a lot of people. You know, when I was homeless and living in a car, no, my tags was not up to date. You know, I couldn't afford tags. This stuff is expensive. We all here live in California, we know. And so, you know, when you run into those sort of, I don't know what to call them, bureaucracies that slide into the policies and the designs, that's where somebody with a lived experience can say, no, hey, that is not going to play out good in real life. I think we need to rethink that part. And so I think that's really what makes it important, to have somebody that's formerly incarcerated or has gone through mental health challenges and is at their various different stages of being able to dive in and participate. I think it's really important. And for me, what's really missing is the impacted community getting more involved. I think it looks like it's kind of picking up a little bit, but really we need more people that's willing to get involved. Again, a lot of us work, you can't afford to get involved, or again, maybe you not stable for a certain amount of time and you can't really pay attention. I think us getting more and more people get involved will really make a difference. We're a big voting block. When you think about the homeless community and the people with criminal records, we really are a big voting block, but we don't vote. And so the little tiny portion of people that vote is the rich folks, the rich white folks, you know, the older rich white folks. You know, maybe they're retired, you know, you can sit at home and pay attention to this stuff because maybe you've done some sort of government work in your career, and so you kind of know how to pay attention and navigate online and the different things. And so, you know, I feel like that's what's really missing from the whole conversation as a whole around public safety is the people that the policies really impact. We just need more people willing to speak up and, you know, and be involved. So, is that good for Tom?
We are going to move on to John Lindsay Poland, who is a member of the Care First Community Task Force, or Care First Community Coalition, but also has been at almost every single task force meeting, so knows the recommendations inside and out. And John is the co-director of the American Friends Service Committee's California Healing Justice Program, and does research, writing, advocacy, and grassroots education on the issues of policing, militarism, and human rights in the United States and Latin America. Welcome, John.
Thanks.
So, John, how are you entering into this conversation? What is your perspective on Care First Jails Last, and what has been your role?
So, by the way, there's a couple of empty seats up here. Can you all hear in the back, by the way? Good, okay. And there's a couple of empty seats for anybody who's still standing. So I have dedicated most of my adult life working on human rights and against state violence in the Americas. Actually, a lot of it in Latin America. And so this is kind of a way when I began to just see how state violence works here, where I live. And jails and policing are a primary way that state violence works. It is so violent to put people inside a cage and make them live there. And there's so many other pieces to it that are violent. And it's just wrong. So, you know, I'm not criminalized. I'm not, either because of my race or my mental health. And so I can work on it. It's an opportunity. I'm not in a place where I have to, but I can. And so to me, that's just a great opportunity. And so I was involved in the efforts to stop Urban Shield, and that put me in contact with a lot of county meetings, And I began to understand how the county works. And the county is responsible for the jails and the courts and for behavioral health.
Yes.
And where these two things meet is where the county is centrally responsible. More than the feds, more than the state, more than the cities, even more than our households, more than our organizations. It's the county that is responsible. And the county is not proactive in addressing mass incarceration and addressing disconnected and sometimes non-existent mental health and substance use services, or the lack of affordable and supportive housing. It's passive. And it takes lawsuits, it takes state laws and state funding to force the county to do things. And often the things that the lawsuits and the state are doing is not helping matters, right? Sometimes it's supposed to help matters. So there were all these deaths in the jail. There's tons of bad things that happened in Santa Rita jail. And so some liberal lawyers in San Francisco sued the county, and the county ended up settling and saying, okay, we're gonna staff up the jail. So all of the care that really should be taking place in the community now is gonna take place in the jail. It doesn't make any sense at all, right? But the county, because it was so passive, had no proactive vision to really address these things. So the Care First policy, which was adopted 3 years ago last week, in which Tasha and I co-wrote with Supervisor Wilma Chan, is an attempt to create a blueprint. And it is something that I think you said it really well, which is that a lot of people, partly because the county is so passive, they're like, can you choose 5 recommendations? Can you but no, the problems are so many, they're so structural, they're so interconnected between the needs of people, between the agencies that have to provide them, the funding streams that have to support them, that you need a systemic look. This is a blueprint that we can't just say, oh, here are the 3 things that you can do. I mean, it might be that the Board of Supervisors has a short enough attention span that that's what they're going to require, but it's really not what this blueprint is about. And we have to address many different pieces. We have to address organizational cultures, we have to address funding, we have to address we have to have community involvement, like Katie was saying. There has to be more people who are impacted, whose voices are in the room, family members who are impacted, who are at the decision-making tables. That's one of our recommendations. Not just like, I'm gonna send you an email, or you're gonna do a focus group with me. No, at the table, when the decisions are made, that the family members and the impacted people need to be. And that's what this process was attempting to do.
Thank you, John. I think you're really painting a picture of like, the county is responsible for a lot, and it is because of their inactivity on creating proactive solutions that were upstream, that were community-based. We now have a situation where people are getting mental health care, or supposed to be getting mental health care in the jail, are being underserved, and their conditions are getting worse when they could be out in the community. I think you're also making a connection to something that KD was saying with that. You all have the capacity to take part in this process and really make these recommendations what they are. But if we're not careful, if the right people are not at the table, and if the recommendations are not lifted up in totality, we run the risk of people falling through the cracks. And so I want you to talk about what the people's recs are. What are the things that are in people's hands, and how should people understand them?
So Christina talked about several of them. We chose, there are 58 of them. They range. Some of them are very much in the weeds. Some of them are more expansive. Some of them are county-wide. Some of them are just about a specific agency. And so they are. We're focusing on racial equity, on treatment, on housing, on diversion, and on transparency. There are a lot of other recommendations that are going to come before the county supervisors. They're going to be presented on June 24th. It's going to require a lot. Like, the supervisors are not just going to decide on June 24th. Oh yeah, right. And then the next day they're going to approve their budget. It's going to require a lot, and we might have to take this in pieces. So in addition to what Christina emphasized, I want to say something about transparency, because there's a lot of money in the county that is unspent. So you have contracts that are contracted with behavioral health, and they can only spend up to the amount that their contract is for, but some of them are short-staffed. Really severely short-staffed. And then there are others that are providing services full on, and they could provide more because the needs are so intense, but they can't augment their contract, even though there's money left in the till from the contractors and the CBOs that didn't spend all their money. So there's that type of money. Then there's also these funded vacancies in the jail, right? The Babu litigation, where the county was sued, created more than 450 new positions in the jail, a majority of which are still unfilled, right? So they have mandatory overtime, but we don't even really know how much money is left over. So the transparency piece is so important, because not even the Board of Supervisors knows mid-year or next month when they make an annual budget how much money is really there, how much is in reserves, how much has been left unspent. So the transparency piece, there's some pieces of it that are required for the rest of it, and it's looking at all across the needs of someone who might develop a mental illness, who might be criminalized, really upstream to meet their needs before they ever get into crisis, before they're ever arrested, before they're ever hospitalized, so that we actually have a healthy county. But then also, we know that a lot of people right now are not in that position. Their health is really bad. They're in a really difficult situation. They're already in a cage, and they're going to come out of that cage, and they need things when they come out. So all of those things, and it can't be just like, okay, you have a housing, here's your housing. No. If someone is ill, they need more than that. So there's all these different pieces that have to be put together. And so part of it we also found is that the agencies have to work together.
Yes.
And sometimes that means the head of the agencies have to talk to each other, which is very difficult. They're busy people. But so that part of what we were working on in this task force is to try and see, here's how you have to work together. Here is the information that the sheriff has to provide to behavioral health, that the housing people and probation need to provide to behavioral health or need to provide to the sheriff, and vice versa. How do the courts didn't even participate, right? So they had an appointed seat in the task force, they didn't come. And the county, because they don't run the courts, didn't feel like they could tell the courts what happened. And part of the recommendations of diversion do have to do with collaborative courts, where the courts or pretrial diversion, pretrial release, where the courts have to be bought in, just as the DA and the sheriff and the public defenders do. So there's a lot of different pieces, and it's going to require everybody in this room to be doing something over the next year at least in order to make that a reality. We have to take a piece of it. It's overwhelming to take all of it, but if we can take a piece of it and keep working that piece, then we can work together in order to make the whole thing a reality.
Yeah, and this important call to action of like bringing folks and their voices to the table means that we can turn a historically reactive county into a proactive one. Thank you, John. And finally, we have Cynthia Cook St. Ange, who is a Newark resident and member of the Care First Community Coalition. She is a fierce advocate for her son, Ramon, who is currently incarcerated at Santa Rita Jail, as well as an advocate for community mental health care and not cages. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, and thank you for this full house.
So can you tell us a little bit about what brings you to this conversation today? What has been your role in coalition organizing? And why do you think that Care First Jails Last is important at this moment?
Yeah, I come with a little different background and a little different lens from, I'm going to venture to say, most people in this room. I spent a full career as a police officer. During that time as a police officer, I had a lot of frustration around the way I saw things being done. I had a lot of frustration around the ways that I felt was happening where people were not getting services. We would arrest people and then they'd turn around and come back to the community where nothing has changed, nothing's improved, and a lot of times even worse. And for me, from a community safety perspective, that made no sense because this was not keeping communities safe. So that was frustrating. But when things got personal, it became much more than frustrating. I have a 22-year-old son, as Joyce said, incarcerated at Santa Rita. He spent his first 15 of his 18 years, we adopted him at 3 years old, and for his entire life, we were dealing with the quagmire that is Alameda County Behavioral Health, trying to get his needs met, and we never did. We never were able to get effective mental health care for him. So when he turned 18 and decided to kind of go off on his own, it was not a surprise when he got into some trouble and ended up getting arrested. And at that time, I kind of put on my advocate for my son hat and started trying to find ways to help him and get him help. And there was a brick wall between me and him, literally, well, not literally, but there was a brick wall where I could get no information, I could give no information. And with, honestly, he was arrested 5 weeks after his 20th birthday. And with 18 years of being in mental health care, no one at the jail knew anything about his mental health history for at least the first 6 months. No matter how often I called the DA's office, called the jails, tried to get some the information to them, I was completely ignored. So at that point, I really started looking for how is this possible? how is this system so siloed that a parent of a barely adult child and any family member can't get some information to the people who are holding this person in custody? And it was no surprise that he had some behavioral issues while he was in custody, and leading to additional charges, and they were very predictable, and I could have told them exactly what was going to happen, but nobody wanted to hear that. So I started looking around, and I landed at Restore Oakland and the Care First Community Coalition. And the thing that got me to stay with the Care First Community Coalition is that they were about doing something. They were, as Katie said, they were organizing, they're engaging in meetings, they're engaging community members, they're organizing protests, and they were actually about getting things done. And so for me in my position in trying to advocate for my son, Ramon, they were, one, an outlet for me to be able to vent my frustration and listen to kind of my perspective on what my experiences were, but they're also a resource to help me understand a little bit about the processes that John talked about. Who needs to know what? How can I reach people? Who has access to the important folks for me to talk to, or who can talk on my behalf? And Restore Oakland has done that quite a bit for me. So the more I learned about the system, the more I learned about the challenges in the carceral system in Alameda County specifically, but then learning more about the Care First Jail's last recommendations or proposals that had been adopted a couple of years ago, I realized that this really is a possible solution, at least a good start to a solution to really trying to get an extremely broken system on a track where we can do something effective and actually help people and help communities and improve the safety of communities, because that's the big buzzword now. People want safe communities, and locking people up is not the way to do it.
Cynthia, through your organizing, what have you learned about the utility of the jail and mental health care at the jail, and also behavioral health court?
Our incarceral system is punitive. It's literally all it is. It is a punitive system. There's no appetite for trying to do anything that's restorative. It is a warehouse. And what I've learned, and I'm learning this even more so as I try to navigate and get my son into behavioral health court, because on paper, like Katie said, things look great on paper, but in how they are implemented does not always pan out. On paper, he should be a perfect fit for behavioral health court. Yet we have been sitting in court every month, and sometimes 2 times a month, trying to get the 4 entities to agree to allow him in behavioral health court, because that is where I know that he can become a more productive human being and a more productive citizen. Behavioral health court, the behavioral health services seems to think that they can provide some services that will help him become much more productive. But it's going back to John's point of people not talking to each other, or really people not being on the same page. And by people, I mean the different entities that are part of it. They're not on the same page. They don't necessarily have the same goals, and it just creates these roadblocks, these barriers at every step of the way. And it is an immensely frustrating process for me as an outsider, and I can't even imagine what my son is going through, because with his behavioral health issues, he ends up having conflicts in jail, and then he gets cut off from all services, including phone calls. No phone calls, no visits, because, again, this is a punitive system.
So what recommendations would directly impact your son?
They told me in advance I could only pull out a couple of them for time. I'm gonna make it 3. One of them is creating the African American Resource Center would have been something that could have helped my son. When he turned 18, he decided to go on what I call a walkabout. There's a long story, but he was gone from home for almost a year and a half, and returned home just shortly before he got arrested. But one of the challenges is that he doesn't trust people. His core mental health issues are because of early abuse when he was a baby, and they're just deeply embedded. His PTSD does not allow him to trust people. But he tends to do better with African American providers. And it was almost impossible for the 15, 17 years that we were trying to provide services for him in this county to find consistent African American providers, or even any place to look, literally just going through the phone book. And I think having a African American resource center where those are culturally competent providers with the knowledge and the resources in one place would have been very helpful at that point. But we are where we are now. Having families being involved in the treatment, again, it took 6 months for me to literally, I ended up calling emailing to Sheriff Sanchez, who was in charge of the jail at that time, and a couple of other people at the jail, and they finally responded and said, okay, well, we'll have behavioral health call you. And I, 6 months in, was able to talk to one of the behavioral health care providers at the jail to say, this is what you might need to know about him. And they go, oh, wow, we wish we'd have known this 6 months ago. Yeah, I wish you'd have asked 6 months ago. But nobody wanted to know. Nobody picked up the phone 6 months ago. So I think involving families and soliciting that information and not being passive and reactive to me having to reach out would be helpful. And then the interagency coordination and communication, John, I don't want to just beat into the ground what John already said, but just the organizations throughout the county that aren't talking to each other, that in my opinion, they're just wasting money. Everybody's just spinning their wheels, talking a good game, and not really on the same page and trying to reach for the same goal. And until these department heads sit down, preferably with the board of supervisors who have set this agenda now, and set these recommendations to say, look, this is what we're going to do, and these organization heads sit down and get on the same page and say, okay, we're going to do this, this is how we're going to do it. With a collaborative effort, I think it's going to be pointless. So those would be my three.
And Cynthia, I think your story really summarizes the value of these recommendations well. That the county is responsible for providing care for its residents. And if it is unable to provide quality care, if it is unable to provide care in a timely manner or diversion in a timely manner, and if we're not able to provide enough of that care, folks fall through the cracks and they end up in Santa Rita jail, which is not a solution.
One of the things that I keep thinking about from a law enforcement perspective and a community safety perspective is that my son's going to come back to this community. Unless I decide to move out of this community, my son's going to come back into our local community, and he can come back with all the problems that he went into jail with, exacerbated by the fact that he's had to experience jail, or he could come back with some tools to become a more productive citizen. And if he comes back with the tools to be less impulsive and more productive, that leads to community safety. I can assure you that if he comes back without any of those tools, it's not going to make anybody, it's not going to make my family safer, it's not going to make the community safer, it's not going to make the police safer. And so none of it makes sense for, I think I can't remember who said that law enforcement really is kind of pushing back on some of these recommendations. And so for me, getting that communication out to yes, community members, but also to try to get some language out to get people in positions of authority in law enforcement to understand that these are not about being soft on crime. When I get my son into behavioral health court, he's been sitting in jail for 2 years already. And it doesn't seem like the DA's office wants to let him get into behavioral health court for care. When he gets into behavioral health court, it's not like they're saying, here, okay, King's X, you're done. You're not being responsible for anything. We're just going to let you go. There's a process for that. There are requirements that he's going to have to fulfill to go through that. So I feel like the DA's office, the police agency, often feel like, oh, this is being soft on crime. And it's not being soft on crime. It's being practical about how do we get these things resolved. I went on a tangent, sorry.
Are we able to give a hand to our panelists? I think the takeaway that I'm hearing from you all is that these recommendations are the North Star for a path for a radically different county than the one that we have now. One that is proactive, one that is well-resourced, and one that has the people in mind, rather than, passing them off into the jail where we're not able to see or care for them or access them. And I think that this is something that really gives me hope, and you all are making it seem very possible. And I have been sitting here asking you all questions for like 45 minutes. I wonder if there are questions that want to come from the audience, if there are things that you're still curious about or want to expand upon.
You've been doing for many years. I have a particular concern, Joy, when you started off in this, you framed it with like, well, this is this process, and before this is justice involved mental health, and before that that's SIMS, and before that was Alameda County Strategic Reentry Plan. Some of us go back to that. And we saw what happened. Agencies go, yeah. Supervisors go, oh, isn't that great that we did this, and we paid $250,000 for the consultants to walk us through this, and now we're 5 years later, probably $1 million or more for the consultants to get us through these processes, all with excellent recommendations that you created. And I'm still very concerned. What are the best pressure points to really push the supervisors to make this real, and the agencies? There is no county that I'm aware of in the Bay Area that has as much siloed departments and organizations as we are here. Maybe my vision is skewed, but Alameda County Behavioral Health doesn't want to listen to public health, and they don't want to listen to somebody else, and they don't. Their culture is not about collaboration. So I want to know what we can most do that want to support this, to apply pressure so this becomes real and not just another wonderful set of recommendations.
Thank you. I also just want to say, I promise that was not a plant, but that is literally why we are here today. So I hope you're gonna nail that in. And also just, I'm gonna run around. So if you have a question, feel free to make eye contact with me.
Since this was addressed to me, I'll start at it. But if you all have thoughts, I'll pass it along. What I'll say is, when the organizing on this issue happened, beyond my time, I want to say it's been at least 7 years on this so far. We didn't yet have the reimagining adult justice recommendations. We didn't yet have the disability rights settlement. And we didn't have Care First, Jails Last, which is a county policy that the Board of Supervisors themselves are committed to. And so all of these things, right, like as much as I don't believe in like, reformist change or like incremental change, if we didn't have those things then, what is possible now that we have all of this work that aligns in the direction of a vision for Care First, Jails Last? I will also say that 7 years ago, we had a small contingent of organizers. Now this whole room is full. There are so many eyes on this. There are so many people that have been going to county meetings and advocating for Care First, Jails Last. So much so that we had supervisors that are picking up the talking points and saying, I care about this. Nate Miley, I care about this. And so if they are themselves declaring it a priority, we have to make sure that we remind them, hey, I'm here, I elected you, and I want to see this happen. The other thing too, right, I don't want to discount the power of the power of the people in making the Care First, Jails Last policy a reality in 2021, but also we halted an $80 million jail expansion. That all came through community advocacy. And so, right, I think that we are right to be suspicious and critical of our elected officials, but they don't move unless we put a fire under their butts. And so I really want to pass the buck off to us as community members to make sure that we are the ones advocating for the budget and also the policies that really will take care of us.
Stab at it. What are some of the real pressure points? Because people are not really voting, and some of these county supervisors been in office for 1 million years, and I think, ain't nobody voted them out, so I'm not sure if that's getting it done right now, maybe, come join us. Maybe some old school community organizing, maybe more people getting involved, calling and asking and following up about these things will help, because I also feel like they start to get maybe immune to the same little group of people. Like they kind of see and hear us coming and maybe know how to duck and dodge, and somebody just responded, we tried to get a meeting, they're booked till January. The rest of the year, you can't get a 30-minute meeting before January for the community. That was the response that we got back. And so, again, I feel like they know how to duck and dodge us now, maybe with a fresh group of ears and a fresh set of bring your expertise, whatever you know how to do, to help call and say, hey, what about recommendation number 23? I found this amount of money unallotted for, or you said this amount of money when actually it was that amount of money. So maybe a fresh set of group of expertise and community members also showing up and applying that old school, I guess, grassroots organizing pressure. Maybe we just continue to lean into that because we did stop the jail stuff. Yeah. So we are winning, I guess. I don't know. Is it too early to say? Are we scared to kind of say when something is a win? I feel like that's going on too. So yeah, because voting ain't getting it done.
Thank you. Oh, you got it.
Yeah, I want to say just two other things. I agree totally with what Joy and Katie said, but one is that the relationships make a big difference. The relations, like what you did at the beginning of this, turning to each other, the relationships in this task force within the community, but also with the agencies. Like there were, like the person from the community development housing agency, she's like, I want the money that they were going to put into the jail expansion. I want that in housing, but I can't say it. You can say it. She said this openly in the task force meeting. So there are relationships that we have with some people inside the system who are allies that we need to work with and develop. And we also need to develop our relationships with each other because this shit is hard.
It is hard.
People are tired. And we need each other. We need each other to keep going. And I guess that's the other thing that I want to say is that there are plenty of events in the world that would lend themselves to pessimism. But the situation is so dire that we cannot. We cannot. The people are depending on us. The outcomes are depending on this change. So it's, from my perspective, it's not really like, oh, well, they're never going to do anything. No, I'm sorry, they have to.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is George Whitman. With the Berkeley Peace and Justice Commission, speaking only for myself. And I want to welcome you to Berkeley. So, for people who don't know, Berkeley is unique, one of a couple cities in the state that has its own health, public health, and mental health sections. So I would say, I want to follow up on this discussion about the relationship between the community and the government. But I would say, first of all, that all our problems here are very similar to everything that you've described. I'll leave it at that. But ditto, and short of asking you all to come in here and fix our problems for us, there is a group I'm working with, a Berkeley Faith and Justice Coalition, which is composed essentially of African American pastors. And they're demanding of the city government and school board that they prioritize the needs of the African American communities and Latino communities, brown communities. That's the general demand, but they're focusing on policing, housing, health, youth development, and mental health and climate. So one of the things that they decided to push is not just the individual demands or programs or the money for this and that's important, but to say we need to have oversight over what you are doing. Like, for example, my favorite example is the reimagining public safety, which I don't know what you call it in open, maybe the same thing. Same thing. But it's great. It's great. They adopted it wholesale, same with the fair and impartial policing, and how much of it has really happened, in my opinion, not that much. Not that much. But the proposal is, why should that just be the responsibility of the city management or city administration? What about the people who are on the ground? And as the pastors say, we know our youth. We know how to work with them to do the youth development, the violence interruption, and violence prevention work. So let's create a structure where there's a tripartite system of oversight for all of it, which is council, staff, and a community organization that we build as kind of what they call an intermediary organization. But I was happy to hear that you, sorry I'm talking so long, but yeah, I was, I hear that a lot. No, I was happy to hear that you're talking about, oh, this shouldn't have been just a task force. It should have been an ongoing thing, and that's what should have happened here with the reimagining. How is that? Can you say more about how you're seeing that? Is that going to happen? And what is your model for that?
Thank you. No, that was,
Thank
thank
you.
you for everything you shared.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think the reason I said that, and I think many of us feel this way, is, you know, we had 2.5 years, and a lot of it became about just like rushing to the finish line to get something of quality out the door. And I feel like we have really quality recommendations, but the second part of the process was that the agencies were then supposed to take those recommendations and develop plans. And at best, most of them developed what we started calling responses. I think Joy was the first one to say that. It was just a response. And I think to the previous comment, it was like, this recommendation. Like, yes. And we're like, but then what? Like, what are you actually going to change? And so I think that part of, like, you know, them making a plan, but then there is now the Mental Health Advisory Board, which is, again, an all-volunteer board. To someone else's previous point, all these system agency heads are being paid to be in the room. None of the rest of us are being paid to be in the room. We're going to continue to do the work because it's what's required. But it's like, it's going to again fall on the back of these volunteer community members. And this power struggle, you know, showed up a lot in the task force process and will continue to show up, where we were all sitting at the table pretending like we were peers when we weren't. The community members do not have the access to information, power, money, privilege that the agency heads did. And depending on who the agency heads were, some of them decided to be helpful, but a lot of them didn't for whatever reason, you know? I'm not saying it was like obstructionist necessarily, but it was just like not going to participate in any effective way. So I think the idea of having a more permanent oversight type of body where we could have worked more thoughtfully and spent some time coming up with a plan. Like, there is urgency because the issue keeps getting exponentially worse, but come up with a plan that was more responsive and where we could kind of take it more piecemeal and know that it wasn't just like waiting for the clock to run out, but that everyone was going to have some skin in the game in the long run. I think that's the only way this kind of system change is going to happen. Because all the systems coordination, everything we're talking about, this shit is boring. It is boring to talk about, but it's essential. It is essential work. And some of it is a technology problem, some of it is a data sharing and privacy problem that is a very easy excuse, or that has real personal implications, especially for communities of color who don't want their information shared with just anyone, especially the cops. So it's complicated issues that we do need to work through. And I just think it's not going to get done in 2 years, it's not going to get done in 5 years, but I think having that permanent kind of task force or oversight would have allowed there to be just ongoing accountability. And that's my biggest question mark, is we are here today partially to, as a call to action, to continue to do this advocacy in the future. But that formal body now no longer exists.
It was the final motion.
Oh, that's, yes.
So we realized this, the last meeting was a week ago today. So we caucused before the very last meeting and said, you have to continue this in some way, which means actually delegating certain responsibilities to the Mental Health Advisory Board, but also getting the Board of Supervisors to approve that ongoing work, to mandate that ongoing work, and that some of the people who have been active in this task force will begin to work as ad hoc committee members, not as appointed people within the Mental Health Advisory Board. And the chair of the Mental Health Advisory Board, who's not here tonight, I don't think Brian is here, was also on the task force, and he is very committed to continuing this work in that way and inviting in other people. Hopefully the county agencies will step up, but that will require some pressure probably.
Say one more thing, kind of a non sequitur, but you started this talking about youth, and when Cynthia was speaking, she was speaking about her child, and I think there's something else, just like a hearts and minds thing, that like these are children, many of them. The 18 to 25-year-old like TAY population that we like to talk about, they end up in jail. We don't treat them in the juvenile system, and they are children, and they need support. They need their family to be involved in what happens to them. Science has shown, especially the male brain, does not fully develop until they're 25. Like, we've been knowing this, and we haven't changed the way that our system adjusts to that, right? That's not necessarily a transformative way to think about this work, but these are kids. And the the family engagement piece was something that a lot of us were fighting for, and I think continuing to make sure that we're highlighting that these 20 and 21-year-olds, especially with just trying to get through society right now and in the last 5 years, they need their families to be involved in their advocacy and in their support, and the support services that they already had out in the community before they ended up in that jail. So I didn't want to let this moment to, without actually just remembering that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I am so excited that so many people have questions and comments at 7:40 p.m. Y'all are out here engaging. I do think it is, we have to wrap up this portion. I want to give Joy a chance to say a closing for the panel before we move to the next stage, the ending of our program. Really?
Hi, Cleo Pryforce, council member, city of Emeryville, and there are a couple of electeds here in the audience. Hopefully, one of them will be our next county supervisor. But when you say housing, we as electeds, we translate that into luxury rate apartments. And so how do we not co-opt that language so that, because the problem is it's a multiplicative problem, but we make it into an additive problem, just add more units. And so the problem is much deeper. How do we reach it into a lot deeper solution than just adding more units that we'll say is supportive?
One response.
I'm obsessed with this question, and I'm gonna ask that we have a meeting with you as organizers, because we know exactly what kind of housing our community needs. We know that it's deeply affordable, deep subsidies, not luxury, not even market rate, not even BMR. We need deeply affordable housing at so much larger rates than is even being proposed by any council members or board of supervisors. So we will be talking to you, and we would love to have you on our team. And thank you, electeds, for being here. And I'm gonna let Joy
Board
play
and
this.
care.
And board and care.
And other
Okay.
types of housing.
Yes.
That's in the recommendations.
Housing means
And-
luxury highway.
Yes.
Like,
You good? Okay, thank you so much. Bless y'all for having questions and being engaged. I am so grateful. Thank you so much to the panel. Can we just give one more round of applause? Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is 7:40 p.m. We have a slim little time where we would love to have some deeper conversations with y'all. But even before that, I want to just say that part of why we have folks in the room today is because many people, I'm assuming many of y'all, but not all, because you are here, many people that are not here don't even know that this process, this idea of Care First Jails Last exists. And a lot of the questions were directed at us, how do we make sure it happens? Why is it going to be different? And like people said, the only reason it'll be different is because of us. We need to keep the pressure going. Some of the things that we're going to do together going forward are things that we're going to ask you guys to sign up for to do, because people power is really the only power we can count on. And what we want to do with the next 15 minutes of our time before we close is just have a little bit of a deeper discussion about how we can start to actually get ready to advocate to the Board of Supervisors on on 3 specific issues that we have highlighted as priorities in the recommendations, so that folks can like tap into what they're most passionate about, what affects their community, and then figure out what it means to actually step up and advocate for that, or show up and advocate for that. I'm just gonna preview everything because I'm like, I know some of y'all are gonna sneak out the door as soon as we start to shift into a new activity, and that's okay. But we are going to have a sign-up sheet that will be out there that somebody will be very aggressively asking you to sign up on, because that is what organizers do. We really need you all, and we need your friends, and we need your family, and we need your neighbors to actually show up and make our government leaders do the things that they promised us. So please sign up for our June. We have a June month full of action that we'll be taking to support Care First Jails Last. And before we leave today, we have 15 minutes of breakout sessions. I'm going to explain that really quick. I'm so grateful. Folks are just not even, okay, don't even get out the door. Okay, so it's a conversation where we're going to be talking about 3 things. 1, we have housing. Myrna. Housing. Myrna is going to lead a small discussion about the recommendations in the Care First Jails Last People's Plan that are about permanent supportive housing, affordable housing, deep housing subsidies, and housing for our most vulnerable communities to keep all people housed in Alameda County. Myrna will be talking with y'all about that. So I would say if you're interested in housing, if you're in that space, go in Myrna's space. It's going to be right over there in the back of the room. We have diversion and budget transparency.
That's the big one.
Yeah, that's our guy, John. He is going to be leading our discussion in this area. So if you're here and you are really into criminal legal system reform, diversion, and county budget, you're here. You're in the right place. If you are a social worker, a mental health care worker, somebody who's really juiced about mental health care, treatment, substance use, folks getting super supportive, holistic care, you're gonna come with me. We're gonna go to the side over there. And we are just going to chat briefly, and then we're gonna close out. So if you can stay until 8, we would love to have you. And now we're gonna break. Go!
Cynthia, I don't know if you remember me. We have talked before. I live in Fremont. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We do need to connect. I was on the task force as a community member. And your story, I heard something. And I run support groups for non-members. And your story comes up.
It's so frustrating, and it doesn't need to be that way. It doesn't need to be that way. That's the frustrating part.
I was a teacher also for 30 years, and these are my children. They're more than your